Today, I'm pretty happy to be sharing some of these double exposure effects. I've gotten a few questions about them, and honestly, they're just such a cool visual to have, and I've seen this a lot in photos, but there hasn't been much on video. So I'm just gonna show you a little bit of my process in getting some really nice double exposure effects for videos. So in photography, the way that double exposure works in camera is when you allow light to expose the same film twice. So you're essentially opening the shutter twice on the same piece of film. And in Photoshop, the way you do this is by overlaying two different images. You can cut them up and blend them together. And we're actually gonna use more of this second idea to fake it in post, but with video and in After Effects. So guys, if you haven't seen yesterday's video, I actually did a full breakdown on how to edit the footage that I'm gonna talk about today. So to shoot double exposure, mainly it's just a few ideas that you can think about whenever you're shooting subjects, or whenever you're shooting anything else that you wanna put inside the subject, for example. There's some things that you can do that can make it visually that much greater than just shooting it without a plan or without these key ideas. So let's dive into it. So when it comes to settings, honestly, in camera, it really depends on what you're shooting. There isn't a set frame rate or a set shutter speed for double exposure. Maybe there's some settings that you actually have to do to achieve that in camera. But when we're talking about what we're talking about today, which is, shooting plates, shooting subjects, and with the idea of merging them together later on, there aren't some go-to settings in your camera. You just really need to do what makes sense for your scene. But there are a few ideas that you can think of that can make that blending in and that kind of interaction between those two different clips to create the double exposure effect work that much better, and that's what we're exploring today. So there's a lot of this dread and this kind of inner grief and inner pain that she's experiencing that I wanted to highlight with the double exposure effect. And that is my first tip. Don't just slap double exposure wherever and you just want to test out this effect. I mean, you can test it out, have fun with it, but if you're doing it in the context of a short film, a music video, or a project, put story first. I feel like it's just a reoccurring thing that I say on every episode now, but honestly, I feel like it's important to say because if it supports the story or its themes, then go for it. Otherwise, think about the why. Why are you doing this effect? So in my case, the way of using the double exposure effect in my story was to show, in a very literal sense, what she's going through emotionally inside by showing her insides as this kind of barren and abandoned factory that I shot a while back in Italy, and all of these kind of juxtaposing images of nature and these really gray and just empty cement places that just gave the sense of abandonment. And in this very first scene, when we see the camera kind of move inside her head to go into the location, that is pretty much at the very beginning of the video where I'm introducing this idea visually. As a side note, these two sequences, so all of the abandoned factory stuff and the subject, were just random footage from two different shoots that I just had on a hard drive. And I found ways of merging those two things together. And I was very lucky to have moments that worked, but you shouldn't rely on luck. You should actually think about movement, think about what shots are you intersecting later on in post, and how can you blend those together? How can you blend those two worlds essentially to feel more like one? And that's kind of the idea of double exposure. But also from that, of course, movement isn't the only tool in your toolkit to tell your story. You can also have light as your ally, and honestly, this is probably one of the biggest things to know how to fine tune when it comes to creating these double exposure effects. Right now, I have a very large soft source on me and the background. There's not a lot of contrast, and if I wanted to do a double exposure with this clip currently, it wouldn't make much sense because there's not a lot of shadow areas in my face. Everything is kind of evenly lit, and it's hard for me to imagine where I could place something here. Now, of course, like we explored in yesterday's video, you can always rotoscope subjects and you can really kind of force that double exposure effect in that way. But I find it so much more effective when there's a double exposure effect that fully leverages the lighting of the scene, that really plays with that. And then of course, you can always rotoscope segments or parts to clean up or to really kind of bring forward the type of effect that you had in mind. But I think that starting with lighting is a very, very important step. So yeah, the main idea with this rig will be to set it up above me, clamp some lights on it so that they can shine down and give me a little bit of top lights, some hair lights, because we're really gonna focus on shaping light to create different types of layers, different type of moods, and just seeing what we come up with. But I know that I wanna get some highlights, some edging, just a lot of really side lighting and not too much frontal, because I really wanna have enough room in the shadows to then be able to place things in them. So what we're gonna place from here is gonna be a kind of extremely angled key. Maybe it's gonna be a mixture between like a side kicker and a key. I just wanna have a very small portion of my face illuminated and have the rest kind of fall into shadow, and then maybe pick it up on the other side with just a little bit of an edge just to create a little bit of shape. Let's fire up the camera and let's see what this looks like. This is just the first stage of seeing, is the lighting gonna work for what I'm trying to do? So I'm not gonna position myself straight in front of the camera like this. I'm actually gonna turn a little bit to the profile, because then we're gonna get a lot more edging from these two side lights and a lot more shadow in this center part of my face, which is where I'm gonna be adding all of that double exposure stuff that I wanna put inside of my face. So sometimes through inspiration, you can really hit that trifecta, that sweet spot of, serving your story visually, adding movement that supports that, and also making it look really cool. So when that happens and when you feel like you're getting in the groove of the story, in the meat of it, those are some of the best moments, and I think that's where you will shine as an editor or a filmmaker in creating these effects. I hope you're enjoying these double exposure tips, but before we move on, I quickly want to mention something about our sponsor for today, and that is because I've used them in pretty much almost all of my projects, and I think you guys will find some great use and value out of this as well. So I'm talking about Video Hive. It's part of the Envato market, and they have a ton of After Effects templates, Premiere Pro templates, different stock clips, and also a bunch of motion graphic elements, intros, transitions, literally anything that you can think of. And it has made my life as a creator, as an editor, that much easier, especially when it comes to really demanding and quick turnaround client projects. It's so nice to be able to kind of search in a bit of what they're looking for, combine a few templates, and have it done in a couple of days instead of a couple of weeks. If you've seen transitions on this channel, for example, a lot of them come from Envato, because I found bunch of really killer transitions. Sometimes what I do is literally combine 2 or 3 different After Effects templates for an intro or something like that, and then make it my own. There's so much useful stuff for filmmakers, for editors, for creating visual effects. So check it out, and thanks again to Envato for sponsoring this video. So we talked about movement, lighting, but another big factor that is often not thought about at all in a lot of projects is time. How much time is this actually gonna take? Because when you're creating double exposure effects or any kind of visual effect, you have to keep in mind that it's not the same thing as getting a close-up, getting a medium shot. You got it, and that's it. I don't know why it looks like I have a giant neck. Do I have a giant neck? You really have to take into account how much extra time it is gonna take for you to fine-tune the framing, for you to make sure that you're getting the same type of movement, matching the same speed as maybe the plate that you shot yesterday, or things like that, where you really need to not be rushed in order to get it right when you're shooting and not have headaches later on. Cut there. Let's keep the same setup, but let's turn off some lights. So I'm gonna turn off this kicker right here. Oops. I just stepped on and broke my teleprompter. And I think I'm gonna keep that. That looks cool. Let's try a variation with that. Make sure that you have enough time to experiment, to make sure that everything is fitting right, and that you have some room to play with, especially when it comes to double exposure. I mean, there's so many fun things that you can do, especially once you have a subject in front of you. You wanna allow yourself, in general, you wanna always give yourself enough time to breathe, to actually still be creative in the process of execution, because you can do all the planning in the world, but you're still making art. It's still not a binary thing where you just go in there and you just do what you told yourself earlier. Sometimes you need to leave yourself room to experiment. There's actually two types of double exposure effects, and you've seen these before. I mean, some of them are the full silhouette double exposure effect, where it's literally the person is just a cutout for the background, or sometimes it's a partial double exposure effect, or that's what I'm calling it, where, you know, like in my video, there's still some features of the person that you can recognize and see. It's not just used as a matte, there's still some person in there, and that's the one that I'm the most fan of, because you can really play with layers that way, and you can really get a sense of dimension and also a sense of humanity, because if you're completely stripping away the subject of their features and they just become, you know, just a shadow, to me it's not as interesting as even seeing a little crescent moon of a face or a little portion of an eye that can still express emotion. And that was very important in the music video. Now I want to share a few tips that are very subjective, so listen or don't listen to them. It depends on your story and what you're doing, but I like to really give myself the opportunity to experiment with really moody lighting if I can. And with double exposure, this, I think, really elevates the impact of the visuals that you're creating. When you're thinking about it, this effect is a very stylized look. It's not realistic. A double exposure doesn't happen in your eyes. It's not a naturally occurring thing. So it's a very stylized effect. So might as well embrace it. You know, play with the lighting, play with the shots, play with the type of camera angle. I think a lot of strong backlighting can be really effective, especially when you're creating like partial double exposures. You can then really highlight hair or highlight the figure or even highlight certain edges of someone's face with a strong kicker or a strong backlight. And then something else to keep in mind is that you can also try to match the lighting of the plate that you're adding inside or around your subject. You can do this in post, you can do this while shooting, and it can create some really trippy visuals where now the two worlds are interacting even more. So we talked a little bit about this type of lighting when it comes to green screen effects. You know, you want to match whatever plate you're going to be adding so that your subject actually looks like it fits in that world, but you can kind of think in those terms when it comes to double exposures. Something else, again, a very subjective tip is to keep your frame balance. Maybe look for symmetry, look for, you know, different things that can spark an interest in terms of your composition. But I found that since you're already dealing with a lot of layers, you're putting a shot on top of another shot, sometimes maybe even more than that. Keeping it balanced, keeping it simple, I think is very effective when you're dealing with that many layers, that many elements in your scene visually, because I think you can start to get into some really cluttery and messy situations if you're not really putting an effort into keeping it clean and keeping it balanced. Of course, this might not mean anything because maybe you do want it messy, but with my music video, I knew that I wanted a very clean and minimal aesthetic, which is why backgrounds like this work magic when it comes to double exposure. As a bonus tip, another cool thing that you can do with double exposure effects is actually use them as a transition. And we kind of saw this in the beginning with our first clip that we showed, where the person is standing there and the camera just moves inside of them into a new environment. That's essentially a transition, and we're using the double exposure effect to kind of step from one world into another. I think that's it. I think that's all I have for double exposure for shooting it. If I'm missing anything, let me know in the comment section below. Let me know if you have any tips that you want to share with anyone else. Yeah, this is fun. I never actually thought that I could share my freelance work on my channel. I hope you're enjoying this, because I am. I think this is fun. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if this is your first time on this channel for more filmmaking videos, filmmaking breakdowns, VFX, editing, all that good stuff. And like this video if it was useful to you, and share it with a friend. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Kriscoart for Kriscoart, and I will see you next time. Oh, this looks cool.